Hey there, friends. Welcome back to As a Man Thinketh on Yanasa TV. I tell you what, the Brits have lost their minds. Last week, over thousands of farmers marched on the British Parliament. And the reason is that they've been given a 20% inheritance tax, which means when a farmer passes along his farm and all of its assets, okay, so all of the assets, the tractors, the house, all the things onto his kids so that they can continue farming for another generation. They're going to tax all of that at 20% if it's worth more than $1 million. And some people have argued, well, if they have multiple kids, you know, they can split 500,000 here, 500,000 there. But the reality is this is going to have a much larger impact on the farming community in Britain than I think anybody anticipates. And it's going to spiral out of control very quickly. Hey, real quick, guys, on Yanasa Trading Co., we have bison wool socks, okay? These socks are amazing, by the way, but I am working on an ad for the Buffalo Wool Company, and I was thinking, you know, if I could get people to send me videos of them with their bison wool socks, that could be a cool video. One of the things we do on the side is we build ads for different companies. So if you have some videos, upload them to Google Drive or something because they need to be decent quality, send them to me, and you can be a part of a commercial, okay? It's just a small commercial. I mean, I don't know where they air it from, but it would just be a fun campaign. I'm not gonna do this until after the Thanksgiving holiday, so if you don't have a pair of socks and you wanna be a part of it, you can go to Yanasa Trading Co., check out some of those bison wool socks. They are truly the best socks I have ever put on my feet. There's something about, you know, the natural bison fibers. They are mixed with other fibers because they're socks, but for the most part, it's the bison wool, the warmth of it, the, you know, moisture wicking abilities of it just make it an amazing product all around, which is why we promote them on Yanasa Trading Co. So if you want to be a part of that commercial, grab yourself a pair of socks, send me a snippet of how much you like them, or just wearing them out doing something, and we'll include that in our little ad campaign that we're working on. Farms, even a small farm, is worth a significant amount of money when you add up all of its assets. That doesn't mean that you and I would look at those assets and say, hey, I want to buy that old tractor, that's got to be worth something. But to a farmer, it is, and to a tax assessor, it definitely is. Trust me. We get personal property tax bills in the mail all the time. Oh, you have a tractor, pay your taxes. But a 20% inheritance tax is absolutely unreal. Since 2016 or even earlier, that's just since I've been really paying attention to this stuff, we have seen a war raged against farms, raged against the farming communities around the world. I mean, you guys saw it here in the United States over the past 4 years. It's intensified. The farmers of the Netherlands got obliterated. This 20% inheritance tax to redistribute the wealth of farmers in Great Britain will obliterate a lot of family farms. I'm not personally somebody who would ever agree with an inheritance tax in the first place. You earned it, you paid taxes on it when you earned it, now you should be able to keep it, right? And an inheritance tax is kind of a funny thing because you're getting capital that's valued at whatever they want to value it at the time that you take it over. But the market fluctuates, and so it's a kind of an unrealized gain tax is what it is, because you've got this property you grew up on, working on it. Suddenly, you know, your father dies, and because he dies, you still live there, you still work there. Now you have to pay 20% of its value to the government. What they're trying to do is force these farmers into selling their properties, selling their assets. And I'm going to get into a unique situation in Europe where you're seeing some of the same things that you've seen here in the US over the last couple of years, where this green energy movement, which is not helpful to the environment, in this case, it is definitely not helpful to the environment, where they're using this as an excuse to take people's land by eminent domain. So the average farmer in the UK is 59, okay? So that's the statistic that you see thrown out there. But most of the farmers are over the age of 65. you have a significant amount of farmers who have aged or are aging out. And the reason why it's kind of adjusting down to 59 is because you've had farmers inherit those farms and take over as a main farmer. But there are a significant amount of farms that are owned by people who are 65 years or older. As those farmers age and get older and pass away, their families are going to have to pay a 20% tax on everything that the family owns. They could go into debt with the banks, okay? They could go to the bank and say, hey, I need to borrow 20% of my assets against, what I have in order to pay this tax. But because the cost of food production has gone up so much from really bad policies and global wars, to be frank, there's been a lot of different situations pushing the cost of food production up. A lot of these farmers are not in a position where they can afford the debt service on 20% of their assets. And some of them are inheriting assets that already have debt on them. So, they're going to be forced into a situation to sell. Now, this is basic economics 101. Okay, what happens, when people start having a lot of properties on the market? Well, it saturates the market and it brings property values down. So on day one, as a family inherits property from their loved one, and they're given this 20% bill on the value of the property at that specific that period of time, they have 10 years to pay that property tax. Most of these people aren't going to pay it right away. They're going to try and figure out a way to knock it down without having to sell too many assets. But ultimately, they're going to be put in a position to sell assets because there's no other choice, right? Unless something changes dramatically globally in the cost of food production, which I don't think it is, they're going to have to sell their assets in order to pay that tax bill. And that's what the government wants. This is a redistribution of wealth. And they want this to have this impact. In my opinion, if they don't want this, then the people in Parliament are completely unqualified to be doing their job. And I can think of a bunch of other words, but I'm going to refrain from that. In fact, I'll get to that in a second. Anyway, in my opinion, I think that they want this to happen. I think that they want to see this redistribution of wealth. But it's a lot more than 20%, because as we said, that the market saturates and it starts bringing the property values down. So suddenly you get taxed on a property that's worth $1 million, and then you have to start selling assets. But because other farmers have passed away and other families are dealing with the same problem, suddenly that $1 million is no longer worth $1 million in assets. It's worth $800,000 in assets because you just took a 20% hit in the marketplace because you've oversaturated the market with farmers having to sell assets in order to cover this 20% tax. So now they've paid the 20%, the $200,000, and they've lost $200,000 in asset value, and they still have to sell assets in order to finish paying off that $200,000. It's basic economics, people. They're destroying the farming community in the UK. And it has to be on purpose, because the only way that you could possibly pass this law, and people are killing themselves over this, okay? They're trying to pass on their properties before the law takes effect. And there have actually been cases of this in the UK. It is extraordinarily sad, but that's the amount of stress that are on these families. It's not a financially lucrative industry, regardless of how many assets they have. Have you ever heard the story, of somebody being house poor? Or today, I think a lot of people are car poor, right? You drive down the road, you see somebody in a trailer with a really nice car. But, farmers are farm poor. They may have a lot of assets that are tied up in farming, but those assets, to go out and buy new, you're not going to make a profit, okay? So a lot of it is old, a lot of it has to be passed down, but it's a necessary industry because we have to eat, right? You have to eat. You live in Europe. Did you know that Finland, the Netherlands, Switzerland, they've all been handing out pamphlets to their citizens to prepare them for war? And yet the UK is taking action to literally destroy their own food supply. And like I said, I could think of a lot of things, but I'm just going to say I don't think that these people, if they're not doing it intentionally, I don't think that they are qualified to do what they are doing. And the reason why I'm going to refrain from saying what I think, because I don't want to be perceived as putting out hate speech towards the members of Parliament, because it's not them that I hate, it's what they're doing that I hate. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. I think it's going to destroy a lot of livelihoods.
Morning, I'm Chris from the BBC. How angry are you? sorry. I can't say because some words might come out of my mouth that you don't want to hear.
You know, in the UK, they have this thing now, it's like the non-crime hate speech. They have literally investigated 9-year-olds. Get a load of this. According to the Daily Mail, a 9-year-old child is among the youngsters being probed by police over hate incidents. These are non-crime hate incidents. Officers recorded incidents against the child who called a fellow primary school pupil a retard. This kid's 9, okay? How many of you have heard your 9-year-old say retard? I mean, you correct them, you know, don't get me wrong, you don't just let it go, but this is the police investigating. And against 2 schoolgirls who said another student smelled like fish. You know, there was a time when my daughter went to school and she smelled like a skunk because the dogs had gotten sprayed and she pet them before she got on the bus. But I guess that, you know, that doesn't count because she actually did. So embarrassing for her. We felt so bad. But anyway, the youngsters were among multiple cases of children being recorded as having committed non-crime hate incidences, NCHISs. Guys, that is abusive. That is an abusive government, as far as I'm concerned. And I hope I don't get deported, charged with a non-hate crime for coming out and saying it. But these guys have lost their minds, and if they're not doing this intentionally, then they're not qualified to do what they're doing. But it gets worse, okay? In England, it gets worse. EDF Energy wants to create a salt marsh on land that is currently used for agriculture and businesses like camping. And the reason why they want to do this is they want to do it to mitigate the ecological impact of Hinkley Point C, which is a nuclear power plant facility. They're going to build this facility. It's going to ingest up to 44 tons of fish a year and kill them. And so what they want to do is they want to take away farmland, and this is the equivalent of eminent domain, okay? They send letters out to the people who live in these areas, who own this land, and they say, here are our plans. We're going to take your land. We're going to turn it into a marsh swamp so we could offset our ecological impacts from killing 44 tons of fish each year. But this is what I was saying earlier. This is an example of how a lot of these green energy movements have been used to literally come in and destroy agricultural land. 1,500 acres is what we're talking about here that they want to destroy. And on that 1,500 acres, I mean, you're talking numerous farms, the livelihoods of numerous people. They're just going to take it, swamp it out, because they're going to kill 44 tons of fish each year with their nuclear power plant. I'm not against nuclear power, by the way. It worries me if these things blow up someday, but at the same time, I think that we need to diversify our energy resources. But what I have had a problem with here in the US and what I'm seeing overseas is this constant, taking of land, and it's for these private corporations. I mean, the nuclear power plant, yes, is supplying power to people, but people can get power in a lot of different ways, right? You can put solar panels on your roof, you could do a lot of things. It is a private utility company that's making money off of taking people's land, taking away people's livelihoods, and turning it into a swamp so they can kill 44 tons of fish in the name of saving the environment with clean energy. This is the ludicrousy, in my opinion, that we deal with today, and we've seen it here in the US. Things have been quiet the last several weeks, ever since President Trump has been elected. I think there are a lot of programs that have been put on halt. The war efforts have kind of been sped forward, but a lot of these green energy projects have kind of slowed down a little bit. There are still a lot of cases of eminent domain going on across the United States. I mean, they're going to keep powering this through until, something changes, right? But I guess my point is that, we still have these issues here, but we're seeing it around the world. And it's the same people, the same, leadership that is training these political leaders, that is advising these political leaders, that's doing this around the world. They're the ones who are really the ones that are doing this on purpose, in my opinion. But I don't think a lot of politicians are qualified, even here in the United States. As people, we really need to open our eyes to this and do whatever we can when we vote to make sure that these people are not put back into office. This is one of those things, this 20% tax is one of those things that's going to have to be reversed, because if they don't reverse it, like I said, the consequences are much greater than what anybody is talking about. And I don't, it's basic economics. I mean, the way that this is going to transpire for those people isn't a 20% tax. It's basically a 40-50% tax when you include the market disruption that it's going to cause. And for those who live in England, I don't know why you would ever vote for this party. For those of you who live in England, think about the costs of food, how much your food is going to soar. And if you are worried, and I mean, I would be worried, because Finland, you have 3 countries now that have passed out pamphlets to their citizens. You now have multiple European countries, including the United States, allowing long-range missiles into Russia. I mean, all of this is pretty scary stuff. If you're worried about food insecurity in the event of war, and you kill your own farming industry, what do you think is going to happen to you? What do you think is going to happen to your people? Like, at some point, we need to return to common sense as human beings. Anyway, guys, I was reading about that stuff over the weekend, and I have been following this story, and it's just heartbreaking. The 1,500 acres that they're taking is heartbreaking. For the farmers, for the people who live there, and I mean, I get it. You've got to have nuclear energy, but you don't have to destroy people's lives at the same time. And maybe there's a way that you can do it without killing 44 tons of fish a year. But we don't, as people, we don't think that way. If it's less expensive to just buy up a bunch of people's land, because you can take it without their willing, flood it out and say, well, we've got plenty of fish over there. Honestly, that's not going to make that much of a difference. It's not like it's expanding the shoreline or anything. It doesn't make any sense at all, in my opinion. It's ludicrous. A lot of this stuff well, you know what I think about it. In any case, guys, we need to stand up and defend the right to farm around the world, because when you look at agrarian culture, those who grow our food, a lot of us can't do the other things that we do throughout the day without having that food supplied to us. And even though food prices are high right now, it's being supplied to us at a very inexpensive cost. If you think about what it would actually cost you in time and effort to be able to raise your own food, okay? People don't put that into perspective very often. And I agree that food prices are booming, and it's something I talk a lot about on this channel. But I also think that even with those food prices booming, it still frees up our time to earn elsewhere, to have farmers, to have this agrarian lifestyle that is feeding people around the world. And when you destroy that, when you start ripping into it, when people talk about the environment and the ecosystems, believe me, I am an environmentalist myself. But I also believe that these farmers who have this land, who have the infrastructure, who have the generations of knowledge, are the best ones to make changes to that. And over the years they have. Every time we figure something out, we learn something, you start seeing those practices roll out. In agriculture, the agrarians, they're smart people. But what we're doing instead is we're destroying them. We're destroying their livelihoods. And you might make some farmland pretty cheap for somebody else to come in and buy, but they're not going to feed the world, because it takes multiple generations to have the knowledge that these farmers have to be as productive as they are. And I am 100% supportive of first-generation farmers, first-generation ranchers. You see that on this channel all the time, and I want to continue to see that grow. I think we've got to have a replacement coming in somewhere, because a lot of farmers' kids end up moving off the property and things like that. But realistically, attacking the farmers is not the answer, and it's going to end up hurting us. And what happens in England, and in Europe, and what happens around the world when it comes to food, it definitely impacts us here in the United States. When there's a shortage over there, especially in a wealthy country like Europe, they're going to start buying food and shipping it in. And then we're competing with them. Sometimes it helps us, sometimes it doesn't help us. But I think that ultimately, when you look at the way economics works, when there's a shortage in major areas like that because of bad policy making, it ends up having a cascading effect against every other country. And ultimately, the costs of food go up. So all of this impacts us. We're so entwined globally at this point in time that when things like this happen, we should all be concerned about it. And we should all be concerned, maybe not at the moment, but we should all be concerned about what those impacts may mean at some point in the future here at home. Are people here at home going to start implementing those same policies? They certainly tried, and we mandated them out for now, but they're not going to give up. And in fact, when they come back, they're going to be even harder. Anyway, guys, have a great afternoon, and I hope you go into Thanksgiving with having some gratitude on your chest for what you do have and what our country has moved forward with, because I think that we could be heading in a brighter direction, but that doesn't, there's still a lot of awareness that we need to build around the world to help, maintain a functioning society. This Thanksgiving, remember to defend the right to farm and show your pride by wearing one of our Defend the Right to Farm t-shirts.
Ancient eras and natural selection have refined and tailored pristine fibers. Only one has withstood the test of time with the resilience for today's days. Evolving beyond the last ice age, the crimpy down of bison creates thousands of tiny air pockets so you can brave the harshest of environments. With a micron count of 15, the soft cashmere-like fiber can be suited for any wearer's occasion, comforting the most extreme athletes to hobbyists. Bison wool is nature's most dependable activewear. Buffalo Wool Company, 100% proven by nature, 100% American made.